Welcome to the Midnight Historian, a place where ancient tales unfold in hushed tones and history drifts gently into the silence of night. Close your eyes, let the past guide you into peace as we journey through forgotten stories softly told to bring you deep rest, reflection, and a serene night's sleep. This is not just history, it's history whispered into dreams. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and leave a like and a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Now let's begin. A gentle hush falls over the world as night deepens. You settle into your bed, limbs heavy and warm beneath the blankets. You feel the softness of your pillow cradling your head and the gentle weight of your covers shielding you from the outside world. Safe and at ease, you begin to drift. In the quiet of your room, a single candle's flame might dance in a soft golden glow at least. That is how it feels as you close your eyes. In your mind's eye, that candlelight guides you across time and space. It is as though a kindly narrator has taken your hand to lead you on a journey. This voice is warm and reassuring like an old friend sitting by your bedside. It paints pictures in the darkness, encouraging you to follow. "Come," the soft voice whispers. "Let us wander back to a bygone era." The air around you seems to cool and thicken with mist. You may even feel a faint night breeze on your face, a cool whisper from the past. Imagine Victorian England. Long ago streets normally busy now lie hushed under a pre-dawn sky. You drift downward onto a narrow cobblestone lane glistening with recent rain. Tall townhouses line the street, their brick facades faded in the dimness before morning. High above, the sky is a deep blue-black, just beginning to soften at the edges. A faint silver fog clings to the ground. Gas lamps cast their flickering halo of light at each street corner, small beacons in the murk. Their glass casings glint with moisture, and every now and then they sputter gently, the flames inside fighting against a stray whisper of wind. Down the lane, hoofbeats echo softly. The slow, steady clop of a lone horse pulling a milk cart. The sound is muffled by the mist, as if wrapped in cotton. Everything is unhurried. A distant clock tower chimes the hour. 6 deep, resonant notes that roll across the rooftops and fade into silence once more. Dawn is still just a promise on the horizon. On this calm street, the world of Victorian England begins to stir to life. It is a world both familiar and strange. As you listen closely, you may hear the faint clatter of a bakery opening its doors or the rustle of a newspaper boy arranging his sack. But there is something else in the air this morning, a sense of old rules and hidden customs guiding these early risers. In this quiet hour, you are about to step into a day in Victorian society, moving from morning to night, gently observing the lives of several people as they go about their routines. Each person's day is shaped by ordinary tasks and extraordinary rules, some quaint, some stern, some almost unbelievable to us now. These were the laws and customs of their time, rules woven so tightly into daily life that folks followed them as naturally as breathing. Tonight, we will follow them too, drifting peacefully from one story to the next. You remain a silent traveller, tucked safely in your bed, yet floating alongside our Victorian friends through gaslit streets and parlours. Let the journey begin in the stillness of early morning. Feel the cool, misty air on your cheeks. Smell the faint coal smoke and damp earth. See how the lamplight paints golden pools on the cobblestones. In the distance, a watchman in a thick wool coat makes his rounds, tapping his stick lightly on the stone's A. Reassurance that all is well. There is a peculiar comfort in the ordered world that is gradually unfolding before you. It is early morning, and the small bakery at the corner of the lane is already alive with a warm glow. Through the shop's window fogged slightly by heat, you can just make out a sturdy figure moving inside. This is Thomas the baker, up before the sun as always. Let us step closer and peek in. Inside the bakery, the air is rich with the scent of yeast and flour. The warm, cosy heat of the oven wraps around you like a soft blanket compared to the chill outside. Thomas stands at a large wooden table dusted white, kneading dough rhythmically. His sleeves are rolled up, and his forearms press and fold the pliant dough with steady assurance. A faint smile rests on his face. This morning ritual is comforting in its familiarity. On a shelf nearby, rounds of dough are already rising under cloth, destined to become crusty loaves by breakfast time. The brick oven in the corner crackles quietly with a low fire, casting flickering amber light across the room. Each time Thomas slides a batch of dough inside, a burst of warm, nutty aroma wafts out, filling the shop. Outside, the first hints of dawn lighten the fog from charcoal to pearly grey. Thomas glances toward the window, noting the subtle change. He wipes the back of his hand across his brow and steps to the door for a moment. Opening it, he inhales the damp morning air deeply. The street is mostly empty still. Across the way, gas lamps shimmer faintly. There is a soft drip of water from an awning, remnants of last night's rain. Thomas leans in the doorway, enjoying a brief pause. He can just see the figure of the watchman turning the corner at the far end of the street, lantern in hand. The watchman is heading home now that morning is near. In these times, ordinary folks typically stay indoors after dark. Only those with work like Thomas or official duties like the watchman venture out in the deepest night. In fact, Thomas recalls with a chuckle how an old town ordinance, the locals call it, the curfew bell rule, discourages citizens from roaming the streets late without purpose. It's an ancient custom that a bell would ring at nightfall, signalling honest people to be at home. Even if the actual curfew bell no longer rings here in London, as it did centuries ago, the spirit of that tradition still lives on in the city's quiet nights. Strange though it may seem now, in Victorian England, many neighbourhoods had an unspoken curfew. The dark hours belonged to the night watch, and those with specific roles, and an ordinary person abroad too late might well be stopped and questioned. Thomas himself has a special badge issued by the Bakers' Guild that he carries if he must deliver bread before sunrise. It reassures any curious constable that he is not a night walker up to mischief, but simply a baker carrying out his early morning work. The need for such a token is fading as modern life grows more flexible, but Thomas keeps it tucked in his apron pocket nonetheless, a small reminder of the era's cautious rules. The thought of it makes him feel oddly secure. It is proof that he belongs out here at this hour. Not long ago, a newly hired constable on the beat had halted Thomas, uncertain about a lone figure. Thomas had only to show his baker's badge and kindly offer the officer a fresh bun, warm from the oven, as explanation. The young policeman, a bit chagrined, accepted the bread and a lesson. Now he greets Thomas with a friendly nod every morning. He steps back inside, closing the door gently so as not to let the precious warmth escape. The horizon through the window is now painted with the faintest blush of rose and gold as the sun prepares to rise. It will be a fine, mild day, he thinks. He returns to his work, shaping dough into neat rolls. With skilled, gentle movements, he scores a pattern on each loaf's surface with razor traditional marks that will help the bread expand in beautiful blooms as it bakes. Nearby, a small lump of dough rests on a plate extra dough Thomas saved to bake a tiny loaf for his daughter, who loves the special small bread for her breakfast. As he works, Thomas hums an old lullaby under his breath, a tune his own father used to whistle in the bakery long ago. The dough beneath his hands slowly smooths and softens. The rhythm of kneading, the crackle of the fire, and the distant ticking of a wall clock all weave together into a peaceful morning song. Soon, the clock on Thomas's wall softly chimes 7 times. He dusts flour off his hands and goes to flip the sign on the bakery door from closed to open. Outside, a few early passers-by are appearing, men in work jackets and women in plain dresses, beginning their day's labour. They walk carefully over the slick cobbles, breath visible in the chilly air. Some carry lunch pails or bundles. A young newspaper boy trots by, arms full of folded papers, ready to call out the day's headlines once more people are about. Thomas takes a moment to light a lamp inside the shop. Though dawnlight grows, the interior still glows better with the help of a warm yellow flame. The lamp's light falls upon the baskets of fresh buns and the rows of plump loaves now cooling on racks. The bakery is ready for customers. Already, the first familiar face appears at the door, a coachman from a nearby estate, come to fetch the morning bread for his household. Thomas welcomes him with a quiet greeting and wraps up 2 loaves, still steaming, in a clean cloth. The coachman's cheeks are red from the cold, and he gratefully inhales the fragrant warmth of the package. As the coachman departs and the bell over the bakery door jingles softly behind him, Thomas feels a sense of contentment. This early hour, governed by age-old routines and respect for quiet order, has passed peacefully. Outside, the city is yawning awake. The mist begins to lift as gentle light spills between buildings. The glow of the gas lamps pales now that day has come. Thomas watches a lamplighter in the distance, extinguishing them one by one, tapering the night's lanterns. And so, the day continues, leaving Thomas in his cosy shop, feeding the neighbourhood with comfort and warmth. We drift onward, down the street and around the corner, following the trail of fresh bread scent mingled with morning fog. Mourning. The Chimney Sweep Boy. The misty morning leads us to a narrower lane where the buildings huddle closer and the rooftops seem to nearly touch above the alley. Here the air smells faintly of soot and smoke. A light rain starts to fall, just a drizzle that speckles the cobblestones and patters on the window panes. Under an archway, a small boy of perhaps 12 years is crouched, tying the laces of his worn boots. This is Edward, an apprentice chimney sweep. His face and hands are already smudged with coal dust, despite the day being new. Edward pulls on a pair of thin gloves, already blackened from previous use, and shoulders a bundle of long, flexible rods and brushes. It's time for his first job of the day. He steps out from the archway into the gentle rain. Droplets tap on his flat cap and roll off the shoulders of his threadbare wool coat. Edward doesn't mind the rain. It might even rinse a bit of soot from the air. He hurries along, quick but quiet, through back streets where tall chimneys rise like dark spires above. These chimneys are Edward's domain. In Victorian times, almost every home's fireplace needs regular cleaning to prevent dangerous chimney fires. Small boys like Edward are employed to climb up inside and scrape away the soot. It's dirty, difficult work, but Edward carries a kind of youthful determination in his step. He is proud that he can wiggle through the narrow flues that grown men cannot. Still, as he rounds a corner into a courtyard, he adjusts the bundle of rods on his back and recalls the new rule his master spoke of yesterday. Starting this year of 1875, every chimney sweep must have a licence and be registered with the police. His master, Mr. Barrow, grumbled about having to fill out forms and pay a fee to get a proper licence to continue their trade. Edward didn't understand all the fuss. It seems like just another scrap of paper, but Mr. Barrow said it's meant to stop any unscrupulous men from forcing boys too young or too small to climb chimneys. Edward is just on the cusp of the legal age for climbing, having turned 12. He remembers being even smaller, at age 8, when he first started learning the trade. Back then, he was technically below the legal age, but in poorer quarters rules were sometimes bent. Now, at least, there's an official insistence that no child under 10 may be apprenticed to climb chimneys, and none under 14 should actually go up inside one. Whether everyone follows that is hard to know, but Edward feels a little safer knowing that the law is finally paying attention to boys like him. Mr. Barrow even showed him a small brass badge with a number the proof of their licence that he now keeps in his vest pocket. In theory, a police constable could ask to see it while Edward is out working, though that rarely happens. He arrives at a modest brick house, the first on his list for today. The building's narrow front and plain curtains suggest a lower middle-class home. Edward knocks on the back door, as instructed sweeps seldom use the front entrance. A maid with flour on her apron opens it. She must have been preparing breakfast. She nods at Edward and quietly lets him in. Inside, the warmth and the smell of porridge on the stove greet him. The maid leads him to the parlour, where a small fireplace sits, its grate empty and cold now. It was likely burning through the previous evening, keeping the family warm. Soot lines the bricks above the hearth, trailing upward into the black chimney shaft. Edward sets down his bundle of brushes and rods. The maid spreads an old sheet over the rug and furniture to protect them from falling soot, a practised routine. Edward ties a cloth around his nose and mouth like a loose mask. He takes his chimney brush, a long pole with bristly head, and begins to feed it up into the chimney. His thin arms push sections of rod one after another, attaching them to extend higher. Soot starts raining down softly, peppering the sheet and the hearth. It makes the room smell sharply of cold ash. After scraping the reachable creosote with the brush, Edward takes a breath and prepares to do what many people today would find unthinkable. He is going to climb inside. Though laws have tried to discourage sweeps from sending children up chimneys, many flues in older homes are so narrow and winding that brushes alone don't do the job. Carefully, Edward positions himself under the chimney and steps up onto the grate. He's done this dozens of times. His small frame fits into the flue like a key in a lock. Up he goes, bracing his back and knees against one side and pressing his boots on the other, inching upward. Inside the chimney it's dark as midnight and close as a coffin. The bricks are cold and damp. Edward's shoulders rub against sooty walls, knocking loose little avalanches of black powder that fall into his hair. He keeps his eyes squinted nearly shut to avoid getting grit in them. Above him, the slender square of pale morning light from the chimney top seems impossibly far, but he doesn't need to go all the way up today. Just far enough to scrape off the stubborn soot near a bend. He has a small scraper tool on a rope. At the troublesome spot, he pauses and uses it to dislodge clumps of tarry soot that the brush could not reach. They crumble and rain past him. A few flakes land on his cheeks. He blinks as one touches his eyelash, but Edward is used to this. In a strange way, the confined chimney gives him a sense of quiet. It is just him and the task, and the distant, muffled sounds of the household beyond the brick column. After a few minutes, his work is done. Edward slowly, carefully descends, sliding down the way he came. He emerges feet first into the hearth, coated head to toe in black dust. The maid is right there with a damp rag and quickly dusts his face and hair so he doesn't track soot through the house. He steps out onto the sheet and gives a shy, gap-toothed smile. The maid can see the whites of his eyes in his sooty face and smiles back kindly. She hands him a coin for his labour and a bit of bread and jam wrapped in paper, perhaps feeling motherly to this young sweep. Edward's eyes light up at the treat. As he packs up his tools, Edward remembers how Mr. Barrows said that in the old days sweeps didn't even need permission or notice to come into a house, they were such a common sight. But some towns now insist on licensing and proper notice, ensuring homeowners know who is legitimate. The maid, likely literate, had checked Mr. Barrow's name in a registry list of approved chimney sweeps posted in the local paper. It makes people feel safer letting strangers, and often young ones at that, into their homes. Strange though it may seem now, the idea of young boys climbing chimneys persisted so long that only by the late Victorian era did the law step in to regulate it firmly. Edward turns to the maid and politely touches his cap. He leaves a few faint black handprints on the doorknob as he lets himself out the back. The rain has stopped, leaving the street shiny and reflecting the patchy blue sky. Edward takes a moment to munch the bread and jam on the doorstep, savouring the sweet berry flavour that delights his senses amid the usual soot taste. He's got more work ahead at another house 2 streets over. But for a short moment he simply sits and feels the cool morning breeze on his still warm face. High above, a pair of pigeons coo and flutter from a rooftop. Edward tilts his head back to glimpse them and catches sight of the chimney he just cleaned. A small puff of smoke begins to curl from it. The household has likely lit a fresh fire for breakfast now that the flue is clear. It's oddly satisfying to see that wisp of smoke, knowing his effort helped it flow safely. He stands up, shoulders his bundle of brushes, and sets off down the narrow lane. The sun climbs higher, and the bustle of the day grows a bit louder around him. And so the day continues, with Edward disappearing around a bend onto the next rooftop as the city carries on with its mourning. Late morning, the shopkeeper's street. Follow now the growing hum of activity to a broader street lined with shops. The fog has lifted, and the sunbeams slant gently through the clouds, illuminating the grand stone buildings and busy walkways. Carriages rattle by at a relaxed pace. Ladies in bonnets and gentlemen in bowler hats weave along the pavements, attending to their daily errands. There is a pleasant din of merchants opening their stalls, horses snorting, and distant bells from a streetcar trundling along. On this street, the heart of a neighbourhood market, stands a tidy general store with a green painted sign that reads Pratchett's Provisions. Inside, behind a polished wooden counter, Mr. Pratchett, the shopkeeper, is arranging an assortment of goods, bolts of cloth on one shelf, jars of sweets and biscuits in glass jars on another. The door of the shop is propped open to invite customers in, letting in the mild air. A little brass bell above the doorway jingles each time someone enters or exits. Mr. Pratchett moves calmly, with pride in keeping his shop neat. He smiles and exchanges cordial greetings with familiar patrons. A young mother stops in to buy soap and tea. An errand boy comes for a packet of salt and some ribbons his mistress requested. Each transaction is unrushed, accompanied by polite pleasantries. Outside the shop, the street melody grows livelier. From somewhere nearby drifts a cheerful tune, played by a street musician. The sound is that of a barrel organ, a hand-cranked music box of sorts, quite popular in Victorian London streets. Its jaunty melody carries above the clatter of wheels and chatter of passers-by. Mr. Pratchett steps out for a moment to see. Just a few shops down, an Italian organ grinder has set up. He's a swarthy man with a colourful vest, turning the crank of his ornately painted organ. At his feet dances a little monkey in a red cap, holding up a tin cup for coins. A small circle of onlookers has formed, mostly children delighted by the lively music and the antics of the trained monkey. 2 little girls in pinafores giggle and clap in time. Even some adults pause to enjoy this unexpected entertainment during their morning errands. Mr. Pratchett watches with a gentle smile. The tune is a welcome break from the routine, and he hums along under his breath. However, the moment is interrupted by the appearance of a uniformed figure weaving through the crowd. It's a local constable, making his rounds. He approaches the organ grinder, and the music grinds to a halt. The children's laughter hushes as the organ grinder and the constable speak quietly. Mr. Pratchett can't hear the exchange clearly from his doorway, but he knows well what it's about. London has had trouble with too many loud street performers, causing commotion and hindering traffic. Just a few years back, the authorities set strict rules about street music. A performer like this must have a permit to play in certain areas, or else he can be asked to move along or even be fined for causing a disturbance. Sure enough, the organ grinder reaches into his pocket and shows the constable a small paper, likely a permit or licence, that allows him to perform on specific streets. The constable examines it, nods and tips his hat. The music resumes, now a bit softer at the organ grinder's discretion. The watching children cheer quietly as the monkey resumes his funny capers. Mr. Pratchett feels a sense of relief that no harsh action was taken. In truth, he enjoys these street tunes, but he also understands why such regulations exist. The Victorian city values order and peace, even amid merriment. Strange though it may seem now, in those days one couldn't simply start playing music on a street corner without permission. Authorities worried about crowds blocking the way or unsavoury characters using music as cover for pickpocketing. So a licence was needed to prove one's legitimacy as a performer. Mr. Pratchett returns inside as the small crowd disperses, the organ grinder moving on to another spot now that he's had his few minutes here. The shopkeeper's bell jingles as a young couple walks in, arm in arm. They appear newly married, perhaps, with a shy, happy glow about them. The gentleman politely removes his hat upon entering, and the lady adjusts the ruffles of her modest but pretty day dress. They browse the shop, chatting in low voices about which tea to buy. Mr. Pratchett steps forward to assist, showing them a new tin of Ceylon tea leaves that just arrived by ship. As he talks about the tea's aroma, he notices the couple exchange a tender glance. The young man gently squeezes his wife's hand, and for a moment they forget themselves and share a quick loving peck on the lips right there in the aisle between barrels of flour and sugar. It is an innocent, spontaneous gesture of affection. Yet, in the Victorian world, it catches one's breath. Public displays of affection are considered quite improper among respectable folk. Mr. Pratchett pretends not to have noticed, to spare them embarrassment, but another customer, an older woman in a black bonnet at the counter, tuts disapprovingly under her breath. The young woman blushes deeply, and her husband clears his throat, realizing their faux pas. They hastily straighten up and act with formal propriety once more. In a gentle effort to diffuse the tension, Mr. Pratchett speaks in a kindly tone, recommending a small packet of biscuits that might go nicely with the tea. The older woman, appeased by this return to normalcy, says nothing more. However, Mr. Pratchett cannot help but recall that in some places such a kiss could be more than a cause for blushing, it could be against the law. He'd read in the newspaper about certain towns, even outside England, where bylaws actually forbade kissing in public streets. While in London it wasn't commonly enforced as law, the social code here functioned almost as strictly as a legal edict. A couple caught flagrantly kissing in a park or on a busy street might be scolded by a constable for indecency. There were stories of overly zealous officers threatening fines or jail for brazen acts of affection on public thoroughfares. Strange though it may seem now, a simple kiss, which today might scarcely draw a second glance, was once considered scandalous enough to merit legal attention. In Victorian times, decorum was paramount. Love was to remain a private affair behind closed doors, or at most expressed through a discreet hand squeeze or a letter. Mr. Pratchett rings up the young couple's purchases, his manner polite and calm, giving no indication of discomfort. They depart arm in arm, tea and biscuits in hand, whispering apologies to each other perhaps, though also sharing a little smile as they step back into the sunshine outside. The incident is soon just a passing moment. The older lady customer buys her goods and leaves as well, and the shop's quiet routine resumes. The late morning flows on. A few stray notes from another street performer's fiddle drift by and fade. The smell of fresh bread from Thomas's bakery around the corner mixes pleasantly with the scent of leather from the cobbler's stall next door. Mr. Pratchett stands at his doorway once more, stretching his legs and watching the world outside. Across the street he spies the familiar blue uniform of the constable making his way steadily, checking that all is orderly. A group of school children on lunch break scampers past, laughing. They quickly quiet and walk properly as the constable tips his helmet to them. Peace and propriety are maintained with a light but firm touch. The sun has risen high now, chasing away the last coolness of morning. As the clock approaches noon, Mr. Pratchett decides to briefly close the shop for his midday meal. He flips the sign to "Closed for lunch," back shortly and withdraws inside to enjoy a simple sandwich and tea in the back room. Seated by a small window in his back room, he savours each bite of bread and cheese, washing it down with warm tea. Through the cracked door, he hears the muffled sounds of midday outside a hawker's distant call, the clock, of a passing horse, but mostly a benevolent hush as the city pauses. Sunlight falls in a golden stripe across the counter, and dust motes dance slowly in that beam. Mr. Pratchett sighs contentedly. The busiest hours of the morning are done, and this tranquil interlude is his daily reward. In the orderly progression of the day, even rest is neatly scheduled and sweet. This part of the day has its own gentle lull. And so, the day continues, carrying our story onward into the golden afternoon, where new characters and old laws await. Afternoon, the noble lady's parlour. As the day matures into afternoon, our journey takes us to a quieter, more affluent neighbourhood. Here the streets are broader, lined with stately trees and wrought iron fences guarding the fronts of elegant townhouses. The clatter of commerce fades into a genteel calm. Sparrows chirp in the branches and carriages roll by with a muffled, dignified rattle on smooth paving. We approach one of the grand homes. Through the lace-curtained window of a drawing-room, soft light filters out. Inside, Lady Beatrice sits gracefully on a velvet settee, a book of poetry resting in her lap. She is a noble lady in her 30s, poised and serene in the comfort of her home. The high-ceilinged parlour is decorated in shades of cream and lavender, with heavy damask drapes and finely carved mahogany furniture. A fire crackles low in the marble fireplace, warding off a slight afternoon chill. The room is suffused with a quiet elegance. On a side table, a silver tray holds a teapot and a single fine china cup. Lady Beatrice has been taking her afternoon tea in solitude. The fragrance of Earl Grey still lingers in the air, mingling with the perfume of fresh violets arranged in a porcelain vase. Everything is arranged just so, reflecting the careful rules of propriety that govern a lady's household. Lady Beatrice sets aside her book, marking the page with a satin ribbon. She gazes toward the pianoforte in the corner of the room. It's a lovely instrument, its polished rosewood case catching the light. Notably, the piano's legs are covered with small embroidered silk cosies that match the room's decor. To modernise this might seem whimsical or odd, but in Lady Beatrice's time it is a mark of modesty and taste. There exists a prevailing sensibility that even the limbs of furniture ought not to be displayed too conspicuously, lest they incite impure thoughts. It's a notion more rooted in caricature than common practice, yet Lady Beatrice's late mother insisted on it, and so the piano legs remain decently covered in her household. This little affectation brings a gentle smile to Lady Beatrice's lips. She finds it both amusing and comforting. It reminds her of her mother bustling about years ago, draping table legs and adjusting the piano's fabric covers, citing the standards of Victorian decorum. Strange though it may seem now, even inanimate objects could fall under the scrutiny of moral propriety. The idea that an uncovered piano leg was indecent is one of those curious exaggerations of the era's modesty. Lady Beatrice knows that not every household bothers with such extremes, but many do keep their home furnishings modest and refined as a reflection of their own virtue. In any case, the cosies embroidered with tiny floral patterns do add a quaint charm to the instrument. With a small sigh of contentment, Lady Beatrice rises and glides toward the piano. She smooths her skirts, a gown of deep blue silk, trimmed with black lace at the cuffs and collar. As a noble woman, she can wear any fabric or colour she fancies. Her dress is stylish but tasteful, avoiding any garish display. She recalls hearing of rules from earlier times when colours and fabrics were dictated by class sumptuary laws that declared, for instance, that only royalty might wear purple silk or only certain ranks could don satin and velvet. By the Victorian era, those old laws are mostly relics of the past. Still, their echo persists in subtle ways. Society quietly expects people to dress according to their station. Lady Beatrice's housemaid, for example, wears plain cotton and wool in subdued hues, and it would raise eyebrows if she suddenly dressed in fine silks or vibrant colours. It isn't illegal now, not by written law, but the weight of tradition makes it feel nearly as binding. Lady Beatrice's fingers find the piano keys, and she begins to play a gentle melody. The notes drift through the parlour and out into the hall, where the household staff listen appreciatively from a respectful distance. She practices a recent waltz tune, softly so as not to disturb the peaceful afternoon stillness. Each note is like a drop of light in the air. After a time, there's a light knock at the door. Her lady's maid, Alice, peeks in. "Pardon, my lady, the dressmaker has arrived for your fitting," she says quietly. Lady Beatrice ceases her playing and nods. "Thank you, Alice. Please show Madame Rousseau in." She stands and moves to the mirror above the fireplace, checking that her hair is neat. Her reflection shows a composed face framed by dark coils of hair pinned fashionably. At her throat, she wears a cameo brooch. The dressmaker, Madame Rousseau, enters with a flurry of pins and measuring tape. She is here to fit a new evening gown for Lady Beatrice's upcoming charity ball. The material, a rich plum-coloured satin, is draped over her arm. Plum is a daring choice, sumptuous and deep. As the seamstress begins her work, draping and pinning the fabric on Lady Beatrice, they chat amicably. The conversation drifts to the latest news in society, and then to curious rules they've heard of from abroad. Madame Rousseau recounts in a light French accent how one of her clients, a merchant's wife, travelled to a certain town where, to her astonishment, a bylaw forbade women from dining at a hotel restaurant without a male escort. Lady Beatrice raises her eyebrows in surprise. While she knows well the unwritten rule that a lady does not dine alone in public, to do so risks being mistaken for someone of ill repute, she hadn't heard of an actual ordinance about it. Mon Dieu, yes. The dressmaker insists with a chuckle. They told her it was simply not allowed. She had to take her supper in her room instead. Lady Beatrice shakes her head softly. Poor woman. As if a respectable lady cannot be trusted to simply eat a meal by herself. In her own life, she has never been in a position to dine out unaccompanied. She is either with her husband, her family, or not at all. But the idea that it could be literally illegal strikes her as absurd indeed. Still, she knows how society works. A lone woman in a restaurant or dining room is assumed to be of questionable character, and many establishments in England, too, would refuse service on that basis. They need no formal law to enforce it. Reputation and custom are law enough. Strange though it may seem now, Victorian women faced such restrictions routinely. A respectable woman could not simply walk into a grand cafe and order a meal on her own. If she did travel alone, she relied on segregated ladies' tea rooms or the kindness of hotels that provided parlours for unaccompanied women. Lady Beatrice considers herself fortunate to rarely have need to test those boundaries. Madame Rousseau carefully marks the hem of the gown as Lady Beatrice stands on a small footstool. The seamstress's tape swishes along the satin. The afternoon sun through the lace curtains patterns the floor with delicate shadows. All is quiet and focused as expert hands adjust the fit of the bodice and arrange the pleats. During a lull in conversation, Lady Beatrice's mind wanders to another aspect of life, governed by strict rules, mourning customs. She glances across the room where, on a sideboard there, is a small framed photograph of her late father. Though he passed many years ago, she remembers how her mother observed the complex mourning etiquette after his death. For a full year, her mother wore only heavy black crepe, a weeping veil in public, and jet jewellery no colour or shine to betray her grief. Then followed half mourning where subdued hues like lavender and grey were permitted. These customs were not codified by government, yet they were enforced by society's expectations every bit as powerfully as law. A widow departing from the prescribed mourning attire could be shunned or scolded for disrespect. Lady Beatrice internally shivers at the thought of such sorrow. She glances away from the photo and refocuses on the pleasant task at hand, the making of a beautiful gown for a joyous event. Still, she says a quiet prayer for the widows who must bear not only their loss, but the weight of unyielding expectation. The new dress fitting concludes successfully. Madame Rousseau promises to deliver the finished gown next week. As the seamstress packs up her things and is seen out, Lady Beatrice takes a final look at the rich plum satin in the mirror, imagining the completed ensemble. It strikes her that long ago a fabric so fine and a colour so bold would have been reserved only for ladies of the highest nobility by law. Now she wears it as a matter of personal taste. How times quietly change. She returns to her settee and finds her tea has cooled. No matter, she is content. Outside her window, the sun shines brighter as afternoon advances. In the distance, she can hear the faint clop of a carriage and the laughter of children playing under the watchful eye of a nanny in the park. A sense of order and tranquillity pervades this moment. Lady Beatrice picks up her poetry book once more and reads a few soothing lines. The poet's words speak of nature and peace, of time flowing like a gentle stream, much like this day in Victorian England. And so the day continues, leaving Lady Beatrice in her serene parlour, where even the quietest details of life are guided by custom and courtesy as the sunlight begins to soften toward late afternoon. Late afternoon, the tailor's shop. The sun dips westward, casting a honeyed glow along the streets. We find ourselves in a different sort of shop now, smaller and cosier than the grand houses of the nobility, yet filled with its own kind of charm. This is Mr. Oliver's tailor shop, a humble establishment on a side street catering to the everyday folk. Clerks, tradesmen, occasionally a gentleman looking for sturdy daywear. Inside the shop, bolts of fabric in various muted colours line the wall. Upon a sturdy worktable lie scissors, chalk, and half-sewn garments. The scent here is of wool and ironing starch, with a faint trace of pipe tobacco from Mr. Oliver's earlier smoke. Afternoon light streams through the front window, illuminating motes of dust that dance in the air as the tailor moves around his domain. Mr. Oliver is a middle-aged man with keen eyes and nimble fingers calloused by years of stitching. He sits by the window, spectacles perched on his nose, as he carefully guides a needle through a button he's fastening onto a waistcoat. The shop is quiet at this hour. Most customers have come and gone earlier in the day. It's a good time to catch up on sewing. Seated across from him is his young apprentice Charlie, a boy of 14 who is learning the trade. Charlie is diligently pressing a newly made coat with a heavy iron heated on the small stove. The boy handles the task with care, ensuring the seams lie flat and the fabric's nap is smooth. As they work, they chat softly. Charlie admires the coat they've just finished. It's a fine herringbone tweed. "This fabric is so nice, sir," he says, running a finger over it. "Imagine, me own dad never had a coat this good." Mr. Oliver smiles. "It's a decent cloth. Hard wearing and smart. We'll be delivering it to Mr. Thompson at the bank tomorrow." He finishes with the button and snips the thread. "Your father might have one some day. Perhaps for Sundays, eh?" Charlie shrugs, but there's a light in his eyes as he dreams a little. His father is a dock worker who usually wears rough canvas and wool. A tweed coat would be a luxury. Charlie then looks at the array of fabrics on the shelf. There are sturdy wools, some cottons, a few linens for summer suits. Most are in practical colours: browns, greys, dark blues. Only a couple of rolls of finer cloth, like a burgundy velvet, and a patterned silk for waistcoat linings, hint at brighter hues. "Master," Charlie asks curiously, "is it true that long ago someone like me poor folk, I mean, weren't allowed to wear fancy clothes even if they had M?" Mr. Oliver chuckles. "Ah, you're thinking of the old sumptuary laws. Those were mostly gone by the time I was a lad, but yes, it was true in earlier centuries. Kings and queens set laws about who could wear what. The colour purple, for instance, was reserved for royalty, and fine silks and velvets, if a commoner dared wear them, he might be fined or worse, because it was seen as stepping above his station." Charlie's eyes widen. "How odd that seems. What if someone gifted you a nice coat? Would you have to say no?" The tailor nods sagely. "In those days you would. People believed that society was kept orderly by everyone dressing according to their rank. Even in my father's time, though the laws were gone, there was an understanding. A labouring man wore sturdy, plain cloth, not only because of cost, but because it was expected. If he strolled out in silk and satin, even if he could somehow afford it, he'd be mocked or scolded. They might not throw him in jail by Victorian times, but he would face ridicule or suspicion. He holds up the waistcoat he's been working on, made of a modest brown wool, and inspects it in the light. This here is for a schoolteacher. Good quality, but not flashy. Now, say he had asked for one in bright red silk brocade, something flamboyant. I'd likely counsel him against it, not just because it's impractical, but because folks would whisper that he's putting on airs above his social position. Some old ideas stick around without needing a written law. Strange though it may seem now, Mr. Oliver reflects, clothing once came with a rule-book of its own. He remembers an anecdote his grandfather told. A story of a village mayor in earlier times who fined a farmer for wearing a coat with too much lace, claiming only nobles could wear lace trim. Whether it was strictly legal or just local tyranny, the moral was clear: dress humbly if you are humble. In the Victorian age, the legal teeth of those rules have dulled, but their ghost lingers in every disapproving glance at an over-dressed servant or an ostentatious merchant's wife. Charlie sets the iron aside, finished with pressing the coat. He carefully hangs it on a wooden hanger. Sunlight catches the freshly smoothed fabric, highlighting its quality. "I like the feel of good cloth," he says softly, almost to himself. "Some day I'd like to buy my mum a pretty shawl, maybe one of those soft-printed paisley ones." Mr. Oliver pats the boy's shoulder kindly. "With your skills developing, Charlie, I wager you will. And that wouldn't break any law, I assure you," he adds with a wink. A hard-working lad buying a shawl for his mother, that's the sort of fine thing progress allows these days. In truth, those old clothing restrictions were fading even as Queen Victoria came to the throne. Industry makes fabrics cheaper, dyes are plentiful, and the world is slowly learning not to judge quality attire as an offence. Outside the tailor shop window, the sunlight is turning more golden. The bustle of the day has a late afternoon laziness now. A few shoppers still stroll, but many have gone home to prepare supper. Across the street, the lamps are being lit again by the lamplighter carrying his long pole, anticipating dusk. A gentle knock at the door interrupts their talk. It's a customer coming to pick up a mended coat. Mr. Oliver greets him warmly and disappears into the back to fetch the item. Charlie begins tidying up the workspace, gathering scraps, turning down lamps, putting away pins. The rhythm of closing time is unrushed and peaceful. The tailor returns and hands over the repaired coat. The customer, a kindly older man, thanks him and presses a coin into his hand, complimenting the fine work. Mr. Oliver bows his head gratefully. As the man leaves, the little bell on the door tinkling softly, Mr. Oliver flips the sign to closed for the day. He and Charlie finish cleaning up in companionable quiet. Mr. Oliver thinks about the day's conversation and the strange rules of yesteryear they touched upon. Surrounded by the familiar fabrics and tools of his craft, he's thankful that his profession now is more about skill and less about enforcing social hierarchy through wardrobe. If a dockworker's son wants to give his mother a bright shawl, so be it. In their small way, the loosened rules of fashion reflect a slightly more open society. The sun may be setting on the Victorian era soon, he muses, just as it sets this evening, but bit by bit it has seen progress against some of the more absurd confines of the past. Mr. Oliver clasps a hand on Charlie's shoulder, and they step out of the shop together, locking the door behind them. The evening air is crisp and tinged with the smell of the distant sea. The docks aren't far. "Off you go home now, lad," the tailor says. "Mind you don't dirty your clothes on the way." Charlie grins and trots off, clutching a little leftover scrap of that tweed, perhaps a token of dreams. The tailor stands for a moment, gazing at the darkening sky. A few stars begin to peek out. He hears the faint tune of a music box from a neighbour's window and the sound of a woman calling her children in for supper. With a content heart, Mr. Oliver heads down the street. Lamps glow now, dots of light guiding him through the dusk. Our eyes follow those lights too, moving towards the final chapter of this Victorian day, where night and reflection await. And so, the day continues, into evening gentle and golden, leading us to one more story under the dimming sky. Evening, the Grieving Widow. Dusk settles softly over the city. The skies are watercolour of purple and deep blue, the last rays of the sun slipping away. We drift now towards a quiet row of terrace houses near the edge of town. There is a small church not far off. Its spire peaks above the rooftops. The church clock chimes 7, each bell note echoing with a melancholy sweetness through the cooling air. In one of the modest houses on this street, behind a door painted black, lives Mrs. Margaret Gray. She is a widow, recently bereaved, and on this gentle evening she sits alone in her parlour by candlelight. The room is dim. The only illumination comes from a few beeswax candles flickering on the mantel and a low fire on the hearth. The curtains are drawn, giving the space a cocoon-like stillness. Mrs. Gray is dressed in deep mourning. Her gown is made of matte black bombazine fabric, devoid of any lustrous thread. At her neck and wrists are collars and cuffs of dull black crepe. Even the small brooch that fastens her collar is jet black. A heavy crepe veil is pinned to her widow's cap, though indoors it is currently flipped back over her head like a sombre hood. In her hand she holds a locket, inside of which is a tiny painted portrait of her late husband. She runs her finger over it tenderly as she gazes into the fire, lost in memory. It has been 3 months since Mr. Gray passed away. For Victorian widows like Margaret, society prescribes a strict etiquette for mourning. She is expected to remain in full mourning attire for at least a year and a day. That means wearing unrelieved black, using only handkerchiefs edged in black, avoiding any jovial society or entertainment, and seldom going out except to church. These are not codified laws of the state, but they might as well be laws of life for her. Every neighbour, friend and servant knows these unspoken rules, and Margaret, in her grief, abides by them earnestly, almost ritualistically. There is comfort, in a way, in having her outward appearance match the depth of her inward sorrow. Yet tonight, in the quiet of her home, she allows herself a small emotional release. A single tear traces down her cheek as she thinks of her husband's gentle smile and the way he used to read to her by the fire just like this. On the side table lies a black-bound journal where she writes letters to him that she'll never send, expressions of how her days pass without him. This, too, is part of her healing and remembrance. On the mantel above the fire, alongside the candles, stands a wooden clock and a few funeral cards edged in black ribbon from her husband's memorial service. There is also a folded copy of the local newspaper. Margaret hasn't had the heart to read much news lately, but an article did catch her eye earlier. It was about reforms in burial practices. It discussed the relatively new laws that closed overfilled city churchyards and established garden cemeteries on the outskirts of town, peaceful, landscaped places where the dead could be laid to rest safely, without overcrowding or health hazard to the living. Margaret's gaze shifts to a framed document hung on the wall, her husband's burial certificate. Due to the burial acts passed some years ago, his interment had to be in the new cemetery outside the city rather than in the old church crypt where generations of her family had been laid. At first, this upset her. She had wished for him to rest in the old ground by their parish church. But the law was the law. Burials in Central City were heavily restricted now to prevent the spread of disease that once came from too many bodies buried in close quarters. In the end, Margaret found the new cemetery serene and beautiful, with willows and roses growing among the headstones. She visits his grave every Sunday after church, walking beneath the oak trees that line the paths, and has come to appreciate the peace the new regulations have afforded. Strange though it may seem now, it took acts of Parliament to change the way people buried their loved ones, and those laws were controversial at first. Many Victorians were accustomed to churchyard burials and felt unease at moving to these new suburban cemeteries. But over time, most agreed it was for the best graves had room, the living had cleaner water and air, and as a poignant result, cemeteries became gardens of memory rather than crowded, dark corners of town. Margaret rises from her armchair and walks to a small writing desk. The room's wooden floorboards creak softly under her steps. She opens a drawer and takes out a stack of letters tied with a black ribbon. They are condolence letters she received after her husband's passing. She unties them and reads a line or two from a few, finding solace in the kind words. One letter, from an old friend, includes a gentle reminder. Take care to rest, dear Margaret, for grief is tiring. Remember, even Queen Victoria herself mourned deeply, but carried on, inspiring us with her dignity. Indeed, the Queen's long and strict mourning for her beloved Prince Albert set the tone for an entire era's approach to grief. Margaret feels in good company with her sorrow, knowing her Queen and so many women around the country have walked this same path of mourning clothes and quiet endurance. On a dresser nearby lies one of the more unusual items of her mourning attire, a pair of black crepe gloves meant for going out, and a long black veil. The veil especially is a burden on hot days, but she dutifully wore it when she went out earlier this afternoon to call on the vicar's wife, a short, sombre visit. How hard it was to see the world through that gauzy dark fabric. Everything is dimmed, as if one truly lives in the shadow of death. But that is the symbolism intended. These customs demand that a widow practically become a shadow herself for a time, as a sign of respect and reflection. Margaret carefully folds the condolence letters again and replaces them. She catches her reflection in the mirror above the desk. A pale face under a black cap. Eyes slightly red-rimmed but calm. She is only 30, yet at the moment, draped in all this black, she might be mistaken for much older by someone passing on the street. Mourning has a way of aging a person in appearance. But in time, she knows, lighter colours will return to her wardrobe and to her life. According to custom, in a few more months she may transition to half mourning and wear touches of white, lavender or grey, symbolising that her deep grief is easing into remembrance. Until then, she will live as the law of tradition requires, quietly, draped in black, devoted to her husband's memory. The clock on the mantel softly ticks, each second gentle and steady. Outside, through the window cracks, Margaret hears the distant church bell toll 8 times. Night has fully fallen. She goes to the window and pulls the curtain back a few inches to peer out. The street is mostly dark but for the street lamps casting cones of light on the pavement. Across the way, a neighbour's house window glows with warm light, and she can just glimpse a family inside, perhaps finishing their supper. A carriage rolls by, the horse's hooves sounding slow and measured. It is peaceful out there. Margaret recalls that in past generations, a widow in mourning might be expected not to be seen outside at night at all, let alone to dine or socialise. There were even old superstitions that the bereaved should avoid moonlight or the night air, for health and propriety. Those are not formal laws, just wisps of folklore, but they float through her mind nonetheless. She feels a small desire for fresh air, though, and decides to allow herself a few minutes in the garden behind her house before bedtime. She fetches a black shawl and drapes it over her shoulders, then takes a candle with her to light the way to the back door. Stepping outside, she finds the night cool but not cold. The tiny walled garden is private and still. Overhead, a canopy of stars is emerging. Margaret inhales and smells the scent of damp earth and late-blooming jasmine from a vine on her fence. The candle in her hand flickers, illuminating her face softly. Here in the dark, in her own little patch of the world, she finally feels she can breathe deeply without the weight of expectation pressing so heavily. She looks up at the moon, a thin crescent hanging low, and speaks in a whisper, as if to her husband's spirit. "I miss you," she breathes. "I hope you are at peace." The night carries her words gently. She closes her eyes and imagines him standing beside her for a moment, perhaps placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. A faint breeze brushes her cheek, almost like a caress. After a few minutes, Margaret feels a small measure of tranquility wash over her. She knows she must continue to live, to follow the path laid out, one day at a time. The laws and customs of her world, however burdensome, have given her a framework to survive the hardest of days. In a world so strictly ordered, there is odd comfort in simply doing what is expected when one's heart is too broken to decide otherwise. She turns to go back inside, feeling the tiredness of the day finally catch up to her. Blowing out her candle, she closes the door and makes her way to her bedroom, where she will say her prayers and then retire. Tomorrow will be another day to wear her mourning attire and slowly heal. Night, a gentle return. Night has fully embraced Victorian England now. One by one, lights in the houses wink out as people settle into slumber. The gas street lamps burn steadily, casting a reassuring glow on the cobblestone roads. A stray cat slinks along a fence top. In the far distance, a cabbie's carriage wheels clatter and fade. On the lane where our journey began, the bakery is dark and quiet, its ovens long cooled. Thomas the baker sleeps, likely dreaming of new recipes. The Chimney Sweep Boy, Edward, is no doubt curled up in his little bed, resting his aching limbs, smudges of soot still clinging to his hairline even after a wash. Mr. Pratchett, the shopkeeper, has closed up and gone home, perhaps counting the day's earnings before bed and reflecting on the curious young lovers he encountered. Lady Beatrice's grand home is still, the only movement a maid slipping through the hall to trim the last lamp. In his humble quarters, Mr. Oliver, the tailor, smokes a final pipe by his window, watching smoke rings rise and vanish, contemplating tomorrow's tasks, and Widow Margaret lies on her pillow, tears dried, eyes closed, holding her locket in her hand as she drifts into gentle sleep. Take a deep breath now, feeling how your own room holds you quietly. The vivid scenes of Victorian England begin to dissolve into a comfortable blur, like watercolours fading gently on a canvas. As for you, dear traveller, you have floated among these lives and laws, witnessing the tapestry of a Victorian day. The absurd laws and customs you've heard of, the bans on public kisses, the curfews of night, the forbidden fabrics for the poor, the licenses for sweeps and musicians, the draped piano legs and barred doors for solitary women, the demands of mourning and burial, these all weave through the quietly dramatic and peaceful stories of this time. Strange though it seems now, this was their reality, and in understanding it, we find a certain charm and appreciation for how life has changed. Now that you have wandered these misty streets and candlelit rooms, it is time to gently return to your own warm bed fully. The soft voice of the narrator that guided you begins to fade like a lullaby's last note. The Victorian world you visited grows dimmer, receding into the fog of time, but its memory remains gentle and reassuring, like the distant glow of a gas lamp left burning through the night. Imagine once more that quiet street of long ago, the faint glow of the lamps, the silhouette of the watchman on his round, the distant chime of the clock tower tolling midnight. Now, even the watchman's footsteps have faded away, and an all-encompassing silence blankets those old streets. The stars overhead twinkle softly, keeping silent vigil as the city dreams below. The city sleeps under layers of law, custom, and gentle dreams. And you, breathing deeply and evenly now, can let yourself be tucked back into your own time, carrying a piece of that peace with you. The night envelops you with a tender hush. All absurdities are tamed by the slow, rhythmic passing of hours. In this warm darkness, you are safe, and all is well. In your room and in this story, rest and gentle dreams reign. Nothing more is needed from you but to surrender fully to this peaceful night. Good night. Thank you for spending this quiet moment with the Midnight Historian. If tonight's story helped you find calm, please consider subscribing to join us again under the stars. Leave a like or a gentle comment. It helps these peaceful tales reach others who need rest. Until next time, sleep well, dream deep, and let the echoes of the past lull you into peace.